I see we're live on Twitch.
Great, thank you. Okay, so
yeah, maybe important to mention to Kate and Jane, if you want to watch on Twitch during the chat, you have to mute the Twitch itself, otherwise there'll be this echo.
Yes, or wherever you're watching, yes. So yes, thank you everyone who is starting to filter in and join us. We should be just going live now on our Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, now on Twitter as well, and with World History Encyclopedia. Yes, we streamed our virtual conference on Twitter, and I saw it on there, and I was like, why not? Let's do it. So thank you for coming back for our fall session of Archaeoegaming Live. We're very excited to be back. As you know, we streamed basically every Friday during the spring, and now Alex and Kate are back to just game away some more. Today's event is a little bit of a crossover between a book club and an Archaeoegaming event. So I will let Alex and Kate explain more in just a second. So really quickly, what is Sasa? Sasa stands for Save Ancient Studies Alliance. It's our mission to reverse the current downward trend in the study of the ancient world by engaging the public and bringing together students and scholars to share their passion for the study of the ancient world and bring together a vast new generation of students. So of course we do this in many ways by having lots of kinds of live events. We also do research on the downward trend. And we have an open access database that's searchable and many more projects you can find on our website. So where can you find Sasa? You can find us by searching Save Ancient Studies Alliance on basically any platform, obviously including Google. Please follow and subscribe to our pages on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. Also, Discord isn't listed on here, so we'll have to update that. And we have a new TikTok page, so please go follow us there. Some protocol for the event: please be kind and respectful, listen and ask thoughtful questions. Again, we are here for you guys, so please put your questions in the chat. We will see them throughout the event and answer them. Please be patient with technology, although usually these ones don't have too many problems. Again, the streams are on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter. The recordings will be saved on those platforms. And we're also happy to say that we are streaming this section to World History Encyclopedia's Facebook today as well. We'll be switching a little bit over from doing Archaeoegaming to book club. So this was the perfect crossover to stream to World History Encyclopedia. And as always, there are spoiler alerts. This is a book club, but I'm sure that there are some spoilers just in case I kept that on there. And last but not least, please subscribe to our pages and consider becoming a monthly donor. You can do this directly on Twitch, which on Twitch during September, there's a 30% discount to become a subscriber. So now would be the perfect time to do it on Twitch. You can also do it through our website, which is through PayPal. You can make us your preferred charity on Amazon Smile. There's a lot of ways to support Sasa. So thank you all for joining us, and I will hand it over to Kate and Alex to get started.
Right, thank you, Lauren. It's good to be back.
Okay, now we are visible.
Yes, they can hear my disembodied voice, and now they see me. And they see all of us. So welcome back. I hope we missed us.
Hi, everyone.
We certainly missed this this weekly mayhem, as one does. I am one half of the team. I'm Kate Minniti, also known as Amit with the underscore online. And the other valiant half of the team is Alex, who is also Alex online.
Yeah, just Alex.
Just Alex. He doesn't have any monikers.
No.
He's a normal person.
Yeah.
And today we are here with our first Archaeoegaming / book club / everything event, a lot of hot takes. We did editors of the book Women in Classical Video Games. So I will let them introduce themselves. We are so excited to have them. We read the books, we have takes, we have notes, we have everything. And if you have questions, more comments than questions and everything else, please leave them in the chat. I'm monitoring the Twitch chat. And other people are also monitoring all the other chats. So please, our esteemed guests, please introduce yourselves.
Okay, I think Jane's having technological difficulties, so I'll go first.
Oh.
I'm Kate Cook. I'm a lecturer at the University of St Andrews as of 5 days ago, and I'm an expert in Greek literature and in classical reception in video games.
Okay, I need to introduce myself. Sorry, I missed that because it froze for me. I'm Dr. Jane Draycott. I'm a lecturer in ancient history at the University of Glasgow. My area of expertise is Roman history, primarily ancient medicine and health, but I also have interests in classical reception, sometimes video games, sometimes, well, other things.
Yeah, so thank you so much, both of you, for doing this and kicking off our new season. So for those of you who are joining us right now, we are here with the editors of the new edited volume, Women in Classical Video Games. So Kate and Jane, can you give us like a general overview of this book? Like, why should people be excited for it? Because I know Kate and I are really excited for it because we've we've seen it. But like, why? I mean, can you give us an idea of what the book is about?
Well, I suppose I should say how it came about, and then that will perhaps explain why we think it's very important. So
that was literally our next question. So yes, go ahead.
So a few years ago, I think this was maybe 2018, end of 2018, beginning of 2019, I was asked to review a book on I think the first edited volume, potentially all about classical video games. And I read it, I enjoyed it, I thought it was great. But something that did bother me was that out of, I think, something like 20 contributors, only 2 were women, and out of however many chapters, only one of them dealt. Yes, this is.
One.
I feel bad now because this is sort of like almost like shaming this book, but
yeah.
You know, it was a starting point, but it only had 2 female contributors out of many contributors, and only one chapter looked at specifically women in games, and the rest of the chapters very much did not look at anything sort of remotely close to that. And I just sort of commented in my review that this was a shame. Obviously, it's the first volume. It's a starting point of the area of study. So there's plenty of scope for future things. And I was then subsequently asked, well, okay, put your money where your mouth is. Will you edit a volume about women in games? Because you said, you know, that this is a big sort of lack in scholarship. And so I said, oh yes, all right then. And Kate and I decided to work on that together, and that's what we've been doing the last sort of 2 years. It was a nice side project during the pandemic, when of course lots of people were playing games, more people perhaps than before were playing games.
And perhaps we should also say that this is not the only book edited by Jane to come out this year on women in games, because she has another book, I think in June or July, about women in historical and archaeological games.
Yes, well, this was all part of the same thing. Kate and I, we put together a call for papers, and partly because of the nature of what we were asking people to do, we thought we'd do it online. We didn't intend to have a conference first and then do a volume of conference proceedings. We wanted to have an open call and invite as many people as possible, make it as accessible as possible. So we did the call for papers, and we got something like 50 abstracts, and the vast majority of those were really, really good and really unique. I mean, some of them overlapped, and that was why we ended up sort of not selecting some papers over others. But yes, so we got so many responses, and we just thought to ourselves, well, we can't cut 50 down to 10 or so. That's just terrible. So we thought, well, let's do 2 volumes instead. And so we divided them. They divided quite nicely, actually. We had about half on classical antiquity and half on everything else. And so they were two separate volumes, and the Bloomsbury Imagines series, which is obviously very much about classical antiquity, that was the home for the classical video games, but we had to find a different home for the other one, and so that went to De Gruyter's Games in the Humanities series. And yes, I mean they sort of, it was almost like, I think there was a bit of a race to see which one was going to come out first. And if you read both of them, you will see that we don't really cross-reference, because it was all part of the same project. They were all coming out at the same time. So you really do need to get both and read both to get the full picture. You know that you can't well, they stand independently, but at the same time, if you want a sort of a broader spread, then yeah, get both, read both.
Which one of the two would you suggest people read first? Because I did classical video games first, because it's more my field, and then the other. But I was wondering if, like, how you envisioned them had a this first, this other second, or it was like, let's see which one comes out first and just read them in whichever order you want.
Probably start with women in historical and archaeological video games, because that's much broader, and it's got a little bit of classical and Egyptological stuff in there, but yes, then you sort of hone in with the women in classical.
Yeah, I think
we have some Zoom freezing.
Yeah, apparently.
We'll deal. That is a great classic in these streams. Baladra is asking on Twitch if will they be open access, which it's, I mean, a fair question, especially for educators who want to use them in class, which is where I know she comes from.
Actually, there are certainly, there are ebooks, and well, we're always very keen to help people if they need PDFs.
Yeah, I would say neither is being specifically published as an open access separate publication. But the Bloomsbury one is available through Bloomsbury Collections, certainly, and the De Gruyter volume is available online through De Gruyter as well. So institutional access to those will give you access to these books. And as Jane said, we're very happy to help educators and so on get access if we possibly can. So as open as possible, but not published separately via an open access system.
Fair enough.
Oh yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh, go. No, go. I was saying I'm gonna look for the links for these books on the publisher's webpage and post them. Yeah.
So can you give us like a sort of an overview of the different chapters that are in there? Like what kind of people expect if they get, like, what types of studies are in there? What types of games are covered, for example?
Yeah. So one of the things which actually feeds quite nicely into the sort of abstract selection thing that Jane was talking about earlier, is that one of the things we really wanted with this volume was to try and cover as much range as possible, because some of the work that exists in historical game studies can get quite focused on particular genres. Like you get a lot on strategy games, you get a lot on the kind of RPGs like Assassin's Creed, but not so much other things. So we were really keen to seek out a wide range of genres. So we've got kind of 3 parts to this volume. The first part does some general sort of surveys of the genres and surveys of the kind of things that female characters do and some of the history behind the representation of female characters in the ancient world games. And then the second and third parts focus down by particular types of characters. So we've got a section on mythological characters, so heroes and gods and monsters. And then the third section is on mortal characters. And we've tried to cast the net really widely. So some of the games that people have looked at are sort of historical games and looking at very historical figures. Well, Dido is a kind of semi-historical figure, but like Dido or Cleopatra and so on. And some of them are looking at more mythological features, such as gorgons or mythological monsters and so on in the part 2. And we do everything from strategy games to mobile games, which is what my own chapter is on, RPGs, all sorts of things. So the game Hades, the very popular recent game, which I know you streamed on this channel, gets a chapter. So does Apotheon, which was also very popular, little bit older now, but very popular. We have got Assassin's Creed chapters, we've got Civilization chapters, we've got some discussion of Total War. Almost everything we could possibly fit in, we have fit into this volume, because I think range was really important to us. We really wanted to make sure we were not getting too tightly focused into just one type of game or one type of character or even one type of history. We've got kind of Greek and Roman and the mythological side as well.
It was slightly tricky in some respects, because one of the problems that we were encountering was the way that women are depicted in many video games, particularly older ones. There is a lot of stereotyping, there are a lot of similarities, and so we were quite keen to acknowledge that, and we talk about that in the introduction, but at the same time try and do different, encourage the contributors to do different things with these type characters.
More connection issues.
Yeah.
You froze right when you were getting to the point of the sentence. Yeah. Try again. We're here.
Sorry, I'm in a very old house with very thick walls and thick doors, and the Wi-Fi router is across the other side of it. Okay, so what did I get to? What was I saying?
You said you were saying that you wanted people to do different, and then you froze.
Okay. Yeah. So yes, we were hoping that, because in a lot of games, particularly older games, you end up with these very stereotypical, very sexualized, very damsel in distress, very sort of scenery type characters. We wanted to try and acknowledge that, but do something different.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, the types of games and the types of genres that are discussed here, I mean, that's a very, I mean, it's an important step in the field, I think. For example, the chapter on mobile games, because there hasn't been, as far as I know, there hasn't been like I mean, a full-fledged discussion of mobile antiquity games, even though there's so many of them, and they're very popular. There's also a chapter on Smite, which I love, for example. So I mean, it's one of my favorite games. So I was very happy to see that. So that's the multiplayer MOBA battle arena genre, for example, that's covered. And I really, I mean, I think that is, I mean, a very important and great step forward for the field that you achieved with this book.
Especially if mobile games, you know, become more and more popular, because now, like, there are not just more mobile games, there are also more gaming phones. So there's actually like a growing market for these things, and like mobile games are becoming more and more like, you know, heavy on the requirements, like on the technical requirements, but also like plot dense sometimes. So I would not be surprised if this was like, you know, a goal, like a mine of, you know, things to talk about in, like, I don't know, the next iteration of this volume in, like, I don't know how many years.
Well, I think because of the way that we did it without having a conference with first, and then having the volume come out, you know, 5 years later or something, we were quite lucky in that it's quite up to date. It's got a lot of very new games and very sort of different things as well, like Kate's mobile game chapter, that possibly if there had been a sort of longer gestation period of the volume, that wouldn't necessarily have been the case. So yeah, hopefully, because it's only been basically 2 years since we did the first call for papers, and we were able to produce it quite quickly. It has got some nice new stuff in it, but there are so many games being made constantly, and so many of them are classical, that yeah, perhaps it won't be too long before there can be a second volume.
So 2 questions, one from me and one from the chat. One is, were there any games or characters that you really hoped someone would write about and you did not include, or were not able to include for space, overlap, and everything else? And then the second question is about anything on tabletop RPGs, which is a whole other genre. So in whichever order you want to answer.
Well, the second one is very easy to answer. No, we haven't done anything on tabletop RPGs because this is specifically a book on video games. So we limited ourselves. I mean, we had to limit somewhere, and definitely digital gaming was where we limited. So we weren't doing any kinds of analog games. There is some really interesting work being done at the moment on tabletop RPGs and other kinds of analog gaming, and kind of receptions of the ancient world in those types of games. And I know Hamish Cameron in particular is doing a lot of really great work in that area. Yeah. But this, not in this volume. We were very focused on the digital side of things. In terms of things that it would have been nice if people did. I mean, for me, actually, it was mobile games was the thing I really wanted to be in there. So then when no one else did, I did it. And I picked what I felt at the time was a really strange example of a game. But because I really felt like we needed to be, as you say, this market, mobile gaming is enormous now. And the numbers of games and the types of games are so different to the other kinds of games we see out there that it felt really important to me that this should go in. So although I really didn't intend to become an expert on the ancient world in mobile games, or particularly the slightly weird romance story games, which has now become my specialism.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
It is everywhere. That's the thing. Yeah. And so it really felt like it had to be in there. So that actually is kind of what inspired me to do that. So otherwise, personally, I would have quite liked to see more on Total War Troy than we did get, but that's just a kind of personal preference. And I ended up, again, doing something on the Amazons in our introduction. So I felt like,
Would you be interested in coming back for a Troy Total War special in the spring with us?
Sure, absolutely. Yes.
This is an official proposal. So
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Excellent. Good. Alex, write that down. So yes.
I have my pen.
Thank you. We were planning on that, but we were planning on asking you. But since you mentioned it, then it just so happened.
By the way, speaking of Troy Total War, this book has an amazing cover as well. Like, it is one of the best book covers I've ever seen, that it is from Total War Troy. So that's, I mean, that's also important to point out, perhaps.
Yeah, can I just say, just since they were kind enough to send us that, we should thank Creative Assembly for that, because I found the image and I wrote to them and said, look, I love this image. Can we please have it? Because Jane and I were really sure we didn't want an over-sexualized ancient video game woman on this cover. We really didn't want to feel like we were promoting that kind of image of, even though there are a lot of those, and there's a lot of those in the images in the volume as well. We didn't want that on the cover. We wanted something cooler. And I found this concept art, and I wrote to Creative Assembly and said, can we use it? And they were great. They were really, really keen for that. So I would just like to thank them for that, because that was really good of them.
It was the same with the other volume, actually, because of course you
We have some more trouble, apparently.
Sorry. It was the same with the other volume, because you think of historical and archaeological video games, and of course you think of Tomb Raider and Lara Croft, and I didn't really want booty shorts on the cover of the book.
I would also point out, and this is kind of an ironic observation, but also not, that if a character is cool, no matter how little or how much clothing they are wearing, people are going to like them anyway, and people are going to simp for them anyways. So we don't need scantily dressed characters for people to like them. Case in point, Cassandra. But I have the images, terrible images of the book covers, but I wanted to share them. This one is the Amazon with the face paint and the Frisian helmets with crests and feathers, and you have it. We got it. And also I wanted to show the cover of the other book with our beloved protagonist of Heaven's Vault, which we also streamed and which we also loved, and it blew our minds. So Unfortunately, I don't have a better resolution picture, but this is the gist. Go get this book.
Can I just add in there that Inkle were very, very generous with their images as well. So for the cover and then inside the book too.
Yes, and they've also been like very nice to us while we were streaming, and they've been retweeting our things and like answering questions. So we're always very happy to interact with them.
So one thing I also like thought of while I was reading through the book is that there's a lot of like new forms or like methods of analysis that are in the book. Like for example, there's an entire chapter on like historical analysis, and the field has been speaking a lot about the history in antiquity games, but the history of antiquity games that has only been like that hasn't been addressed that much. So how do you feel like in terms of like methods and methods and methodology, like how does this book like push the field forward?
Well, I think the first thing really is by acknowledging that video games are worth studying, and obviously we're not the first people to do this, but it's in classics anyway. It's still relatively new. There are just a handful really of books, so few that you can include them all in a relatively short footnote. You know, so I think that first and foremost, dedicating our attention to video games, but also women in video games as a sort of subject, that it intersects with so many different disciplines. But yeah, that's again a sort of a broadly across the volume. As far as the specific chapters are concerned, well, those are really down to what the approaches that they were taking. We had some classicists, we had some archaeologists, you know, we had some gender studies, we had some war studies, you know, so people with their different academic backgrounds were bringing their own approaches to their chapters, and they fit together very nicely with what we were trying to do.
I was reading the book very recently, and I really like the quantitative approach in one of the chapters. I just swallowed a whole cough drop. I'm sorry, this was terrible. That's what happens when you have a cough. And I was looking at those graphs and I was like, this is something that I've never seen before, and this is something that I really like, and it's something that I need to use because I mean, doing something else, another, like I'm sending stuff for other volumes that are not on women but on monsters, but I think that the quantitative approach is not something about which I had thought, and it was very interesting because it was also like very jarring to see that kind of data with numbers, like with hard, you know, with raw data and numbers, and saying, oh, this doesn't look good. Not that we didn't know, but you know, seeing it on page with numbers is a whole different effect than just reading about it. At least for me, for how I work. We have a question from Twitch. Do you think that Heaven's Vault sort of falls into both volumes in terms of its themes? There is a strong undercurrent of antiquity there, but it's framed in a Middle Eastern perspective.
Say that Heaven's Vault has elements of Egyptology in it. The main character was inspired by an Egyptologist, and the work.
She'll be back. We hope that she'll be back. We also had the Egyptologist, you know, that was the inspiration for the character for our first episode of the stream, of the Heaven's Vault stream. she was very gracious about it. Okay, you're back. We can see you move.
I spoke to John Ingold quite extensively about the game, and that's in my chapter in the historical and archaeological video games volume.
Oh.
Yeah. Just to one thing I also noticed, I also like found through the book, which I also didn't think that we've seen that much about is like the use of like non-scholarly text as well. Like interviews, YouTube videos, blog posts, for example, and I think that's very important. I don't think we saw that as extensively in the other volumes on classical antiquity games, and I think that is like it's a way of bringing like game communities. It's a way of bringing game developers and actual players into the academic discussions. I think we're not confining ourselves to an academic bubble or something like that. And also in terms of like very recent games, for example, the chapter on Hades, like there isn't that much available on Hades as of right now. So how do you think adding those kind of perspectives or those kind of texts adds to the overall study of this field, I think, or of the games within this field?
Yeah, I mean, we both felt that this was important, and we were quite lucky that, I mean, okay, so copy editing, things like how you cite Reddit posts, I have to say, the publisher had some difficulties with, but they were very supportive of us, you know, doing what we felt we needed to. So they didn't make any problems in terms of what we were quoting or referring to, or the use of interviews or anything like that. They were really good about all of it once we got past the copy editing difficulties. And I think, you know, as you say, this is really important, and it's worth noting that Jane mentioned all the different academic backgrounds of a lot of the people we've got, but we also had non-academics contributing to this volume, which was really valuable. We have people who write or have written for kind of games publications more broadly as well, as contributors, and it seems to me that this is going to be essential in this developing field, because I mean, so certainly, I mean, you know, when I work on ancient literature, I have absolutely no way of speaking to either Sophocles or Sophocles' audiences. I'm just sort of saying, well, I hope that Sophocles was aiming for this, and maybe this is what his audience thought. But with games, we have a really valuable opportunity to ask them. We can ask, and that doesn't necessarily mean that our analysis should be limited by the intentions of people like writers. But when we have the chance to go away and ask them, you know, why is this character in this form? What kind of model of power were you trying to do? Which I was really lucky that the writer of my game, again, was really happy to, she gave me an in-depth interview and talked to me at length about, you know, what her inspirations had been and what her intentions had been, and that's, I think, really valuable. And again, then you can go to things like forums and you can actually see, well, how are people responding to this? And I think that's really important. And I think kind of as we go on, and particularly if we expect this scholarship to make any headway in those gaming communities as well, if we want gamers to be reading it and game developers to be reading and responding to it, which I think we do, then we have to be reading and responding to them as well. It can't be a kind of one-way street. We have to be listening to their ideas, so then they'll listen to our ideas, and hopefully this could be a much more productive dialogue. So I think for both of us, that was kind of really important, and we were really pleased that it worked out so well.
And in relation to that, we have a question from Maciej Poprowski, who asks if you encountered any backlash from the broader classical peer review process because of quoting these non-scholarly sources. So I think aside beyond the copy editing difficulties, like the very nature of them.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, we haven't had, so the book hasn't had its reviews yet, so we'll wait and see what the kind of reviews say. But I think there's quite a lot of recognition that because this field is so new, quite a lot of the ways we work in it are new as well. So there is, and for some of us, that's methodological as well. I mean, feminist scholars have been talking for quite a long time about one of the ways of kind of raising up women's voices is engaging with new media, with thinking about blog posts and so on as a way of citing different people and changing the dialogue. So when you're combining game studies and feminist studies in the way that a book like this does, where there are kind of multiple reasons to be engaging with these other sources, and certainly in the kind of manuscript review process, in fact, people wanted even more of that than we had rather than less. So I think there was, everyone was pretty positive about it. We'll wait and see, obviously, what the reviews say, but I hope that there's kind of enough progress in this, as I say, quite modern field that it's not really going to be an issue, and certainly it hasn't been an issue so far.
I mean, I would just say actually that I don't think in classics anyway, the people working on games tend to be sort of about 45 years old downwards, and for a lot of people who are going to, or who are currently game scholars or are going to become game scholars, they were gamers first before they were academics. So yeah, I mean, I have so many students who have come into classics because they enjoyed things like Total War. So that's something to bear in mind as well, that it's the gamers that find academia, not necessarily academia that finds games. So we can't really be snooty about it, because yeah, it's a good thing for the discipline. It's a new stream of participants.
We have another question from Viking Nerd. So Assassin's Creed as a franchise is well known for male and Eurocentric experiences in these worlds.
Let's go.
Here we are. The last two games finally seem to have brought women to the forefront, whether main or side characters. Now they are pivoting away from that despite huge success. I think you're referring to Valhalla being the highest selling game of them all. Many attribute the recent games to be Witcher 3 clones, despite the fact that the myths these games feature outdate The Witcher by many centuries. Since they are big on historical accuracy, do you see this as a regression for Assassin's Creed and women in games? I think you're referring to the Assassin's Creed Mirage announcement, which I know people have rightly have strong opinions about.
Yeah, I mean, I do, I'm afraid.
Oh, you liked my my tweet about them, going back to the roots and going, somewhere else. With that,
yeah, I think this is really disappointing, actually, particularly because I think the last two Assassin's Creed games have got quite a complicated relationship with gender. There are some good things there. The possibility of playing as a female protagonist is sort of good, although I'm afraid I disagree with our contributor Richard Cole in his chapter in our volume. I'm not sure how much difference it makes if you present a kind of male or female character and then present them as if they're exactly the same. I'm not sure that's representative of gender in either direction, really.
It is. There is something to be said there, but this is like me, because I'm a queer woman. It is good if you play as a woman. You can finally play as a queer woman, which is something that, yes, you could do it in Dragon Age Inquisition, for instance, and in what's the other, Mass Effect. But it is something, there is a difference between being told you have the option to do that, or this is the canon character and they are canonically queer, right? So that's that's where I was reading the same chapter this morning and I was like, yes, no, maybe I need to ask my gay men friends who play as Alexios, because it's a beefcake. So many issues there. Anyway, sorry, I cut you off.
Absolutely, yes. So so there's complexities in the question of representation. The fact that Ubisoft has had such a horrendous history, which of course we talked about in our introduction as well, that makes it difficult to say, oh, look how progressive they are. So it is. I mean, Mirage to me does feel like a regression. It also feels like a regression, not from a position of particular strength, actually. So it's particularly disappointing. This could have been a great opportunity. And I should say, I recently spoke at the Digital Medievalisms on Screen conference about Valhalla, and pointed to the kind of the even when you've got something like Valhalla where you can choose male, female protagonists, the advertising of Valhalla was really male dominated. So Ubisoft has never been kind of in this fantastic positive space, and they had more room to go into a more positive space before they start backing away from it. So I find that kind of especially frustrating. And I think the kind of model of historical accuracy we're seeing here is deeply flawed, frankly. And I also think, the questions of accuracy in this area are not all that useful either, personally. No. So yeah, I find it frustrating and disappointing. I also have strong views on it. But I should say, actually, I'm not a main Assassin's. I have played the kind of most recent Assassin's Creed games, but I probably won't play Mirage, so I'm probably not their target audience. But actually, I've been put off playing it by this announcement as well. So perhaps that says something quite important about the kinds of choices that Ubisoft is making here, really.
And the kind of words that they're using to make announcements. I was telling, I don't know with whom I was ranting. I've ranted with everyone, including my wife, who's not a gamer, but not a gamer in the sense that I'm a gamer. She plays other things. And I was saying, if they had just said, this is our new game, that's it, I would have been less, irked about the fact that they say we're going back to our roots. And our roots are male fixed protagonists, which is actually this is a good segue into something that is in the book, and it's a sentence that I wrote down, which has to do with historical accuracy, which is, few have been demanding historical accuracy until women were more visibly depicted in prominent and historically relevant positions of political, military, and individual agency, which I thought was a great quote, and something that I've seen. And there is something that I wanted to ask on that, and also on issues of Orientalism, because while reading the various chapters, I saw that there's a very big correspondence between powerful historical women that are the other, capital O, other. There's Dido, who is Cleopatra, basically. There's Cleopatra herself. There are the Amazons. I mean, we could argue that some of the heterae in ancient Greece were also the other, because some of them were enslaved women and Thracian women and everything else. So how do you see this complicated relationship between women in power being also othered? Can we just accept that a woman can be in power if she is not Roman or Greek? How are we doing it on Orientalism? Is Edward Said going, to slap us in the face? Please.
Okay, that was, oh, Jane, did you want to? No, okay. That was quite a complex question.
Yeah, sorry. I can break it down if you want.
No, I bet it's a good one. I mean, okay, I'm going to kind of start anecdotally before I go academically. I was very recently at the kind of audiovisual Roman women conference, and one of the things that kind of kept coming out of that is that it was a sort of a shared joke that if the only Roman woman you can think of is Cleopatra, there is a serious problem here, because she's obviously not a Roman woman. So we had quite a strong kind of, no Cleopatras at this conference attitude, really. But it was quite interesting that the reason a lot of people think, oh, Roman woman Cleopatra, is because that's kind of the only model of femininity that has been portrayed. And this isn't limited to games. This is kind of a consistent problem in kind of all classical receptions, right? The idea that these kind of othered female figures are acceptable or kind of portrayable. And I would say, I think some of that does go back to the sources. I don't think we can blame everything on the Romans or the Greeks, but the fact that they themselves portray, I mean, the Amazons being deliberately kind of ethnically other is a big deal for Greek sources. So that's not totally coming from us. I do think games and kind of modern receptions could be doing a lot better to move away from that. So I think, yes, there are questions of kind of othering and Orientalism in here that need more work, and absolutely could be explored further as well. I think is it Andrew Dufton's chapter in our volume is particularly useful on this, and looking at Dido. But this is absolutely somewhere where I think this kind of intersection of kind of woman with other methods of difference, other attitudes, could absolutely be explored even further, because I think you're right, there is kind of quite a strong correlation. I don't think it's limited to games. I think it comes up a lot in games, but it's strong enough that it's something to look at further.
It's also something that happens. I mean, if we go back to the sources, Roman women, when they step outside of their box, they are other too. Fulvia, for example, Roman elite woman, does everything a Roman elite woman should do, which is, marry advantageously, have children, support her husbands financially, politically, etc. But as soon as she starts trying to exert some of her own autonomy and agency in spheres like politics and military activities where Roman women are not supposed to be, she is othered, and she's described as being only a woman in appearance, and things like that. So it's not just the Orientalism. It's everywhere as far as the surviving sources are concerned.
It is the patriarchy. Also the point about the Amazons being the other. The Amazons are also the embodiment, as I said one time in class, and I got people with eyes as big as saucers, but it's true. They are like the embodiment of the sexual anxiety of Greek men. because they're everything that they're afraid of, like women with some power and weapons and pants. I mean, what is this? What are we looking at? We have a question from Twitch chat. Do you think that this othering is also caused by us knowing a lot less about powerful women of antiquity?
Yes, that's true to a certain extent, but it's also because there is a lot less value placed upon the ways in which women in these societies held power and exerted power. And so things like domestic power, being the head of the family, Roman women were expected to support their fathers, their husbands, their sons in their political careers. They were meant to be behind the scenes doing this sort of glad handing. And well, that's not something that necessarily lends itself well to a video game. A lot of ancient video games involve warfare and combat, and traditionally Roman women were not doing that. But there is this sort of just this general devaluing of anything that women do, anything that women find interesting, anything that's female. And that's in the sources, female qualities are not valued as highly as male ones. But in the contemporary world, that's true as well. As soon as women start doing something, doing a particular career, the pay goes down, the conditions get worse. So yeah, we don't know a huge amount about powerful women in antiquity as far as what they were doing is concerned, because that's not something that the ancient writers were interested in writing about. And even if they were, it's not something that in the medieval period, the people that were preserving the text cared about. They cared about warfare, they cared about politics, they cared about the great men. They didn't care about the other stuff. And that does slant our modern perceptions of, oh, well, women never did anything. Women never had any power. Women shouldn't be in this space. And this is what we see in the video games. It's what we see in the forums that complain about the historical accuracy of the games, when they don't complain about, other very anachronistic things.
Yeah, one of the most common jokes in the Assassin's Creed community, but like community with like a pinch of salt, is, oh, remember when they took away the crossbow from Assassin's Creed 1 because it was historically inaccurate? Like that's not why they took it away. They just nerfed the character because it was overpowered. That's nothing about, it's not historical accuracy when you have shiny Izu objects that mine dead people. But yeah, also you reminded me of something when talking about we know less about what powerful women did in antiquity. It is a very Eurocentric bias, and this is very specific for Cleopatra, because the Arab tradition, the Egyptian tradition on Cleopatra in Arabic is everything but, the Roman, tradition of her being this sort of sexual danger going around, this vixen who's like at the same time too dangerous to be around, but also not too beautiful because she got a big nose, which is something that really sent me, because beauty is subjective, right? I mean, otherwise just, but it's always, it's something weird. But it's also like a big, like many games have this big Western centric perspective on antiquity, right? This is something that I said on a roundtable, what was it, 2 years ago? Linear time is confusing, in which I said that most people, that like most creators only ever make games that are about the great men and like elite men, and not even like non-elite men, right? Because you don't play as a farmer. I mean, yes, you have the farmers in Age of Empires, but everything else. So there's like, there's a double bias in there. This is especially true when you look at figures that in other cultures are actually talked about in more positive ways, but we don't get that because we don't read that, right? We as Western Europeans / Americans, North Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Cleopatra's a really interesting example for those purposes, because if we talk about, we know less about, let's say, kind of Roman women as Roman women. So the first sources start with a bias. They present this kind of Cleopatra as Roman mistress, as Maria White puts her. And then the problem is, I mean, it seems to me the problem is that we massively compound the bias. So, okay, we can blame the kind of medieval people for only copying some sources, but then we carry on talking about the narrative that we think we know about Cleopatra. So then we, as kind of Western audiences, Western developers and so on, stick to just that narrative, and it just gets more and more narrow and in some ways worse and worse. And so almost kind of existing knowledge, as you say, absolutely from other traditions, knowledge that is there, isn't the stuff necessarily that's getting through. So then because of people's expectations about what a woman should be in this context, they kind of create a narrative that fits that rather than necessarily looking at the full extent of what they could be doing. So you have a kind of bias that starts in the ancient world and then it doesn't get improved with time.
Yeah, and also about Cleopatra, this is so funny because we are taking at face value what the Roman propaganda said, not the Egyptian propaganda, which is like, her being a queen mother, like on the pylons of the Temple of Philae. She's like perfectly, appropriate, and like she's giving birth to the next pharaoh and all of that. But then for other pharaohs, we drink the pharaonic Kool-Aid, and this is Kara Kune speaking through me. And we believe everything that they said and showed about themselves, but we don't give the women the same courtesy. So when someone says, oh, the raunchy graffiti in their burial, clearly about Hatshepsut, doing the unspeakable things with her male lovers, but we don't say the same about other pharaohs being called, terrible tyrants and everything else because they said they were not. So there is also a double standard there. So but it's always funny to me that like we have these double standards towards pharaohs, which would probably laugh about it from whatever they are now. And they're like, ha, 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 they believe that. We have a lot of questions. I'm gonna let Alex speak because I've been talking too much, and I'm sorry about.
Yeah, so we have another question by Viking Nerd. So do you think there's also an important intersection of gender and religion in these games that also needs to be examined? So, for example, cultures that were historically pagan versus Christian, and the fact there is some Christian washing of these historical eras, which would likely affect how women are depicted.
Yeah, I think there is a really important intersection of gender and religion in these games. I'm not sure it's always necessarily down to Christian washing. One of the things I've been looking at recently, actually, and intend to look at some point in the next 5 years when I finish all the other projects that I keep lining up for myself, is how you represent ancient religions in games. Because in a way that you don't necessarily see with Christianity or some of the kind of more modern religions, there's quite a lot of kind of making ancient religion very shallow and making it nearly always just part of a game mechanic in a lot of these games, which is not necessarily the same as Christian washing them, except that the kind of the dismissal of the value of the religion, I suppose, is a little bit like Christian washing and saying, well, this is just something where, put sacrifice in, get blessing out. We don't have to take this seriously as any kind of, anything else, anything more than that. And that does have the effect of doing things like diminishing the importance of priestesses or women who did have quite significant religious roles in various societies. So I think there absolutely is an important intersection here that needs some kind of serious looking at. But I think it's to do with the kind of broader portrayal of religion, particularly in ancient world games, that is doing some quite interesting, often quite shallow things with ideas of ancient religion. And that has kind of different effects, particularly in different genres of game, actually. So yes, I do think this is something to look at more. I haven't done it yet, and those are just my initial thoughts, but
yeah, because I think that there are big differences between how, ancient, pagan mythologies or religions are represented versus Christianity. It's a much more sensitive issue to represent these monotheistic religions. But even there, I think there's some sort of cultural bias, because in games like Smite, for example, you get the Greek gods, Roman gods, Mayan, Norse, and so on. But you also get the gods from Hinduism, and they are presented with the same types of sexualization, the same visual processes that are applied to the old gods are applied to the Hindu gods as well. And those of course are still actively worshipped by millions of people. So there's this sense that because it's other, because it's far away, because it's exotic, it's sort of less important or less. It isn't at the same level something like that. And they have been called out about that. Smite, there's been a very big controversy in like Smite and Hindu communities, and they basically say they don't want to stop about that, and it's very problematic, I think. We all have another question by Majay. We know a lot about the Nubian powerful women, Queen Amaniranas defied Rome for several years. Maybe the non-European perspective will help change the status quo. Which I hope it does.
That's an interesting idea. I know quite a few people that work in the games industry, and whenever I've sort of raised these sorts of issues with them, what I get told is if game developers thought that it would make them money, they would make these games, these different sorts of games. And it's interesting when you think about how there are games development studios all across the world, not just in America, not just in Western Europe. And what kind of games are they making, and what kind of, when it comes to the sort of historical classical material, what kind of cultures are they basing their games on? What kind of periods within these cultures are they basing their games on? And they are fairly conservative, and they do tend to, in much the same way that TV programs and films tend to focus on the same periods again, even though there's so many more interesting things they could be doing. And yes, I mean, that's part of being sort of an ancient historian who plays games. You know all these other characters that they could bring in. They could make really good games out, and it's really sad to think that you just keep getting more Caesar, you know.
Yeah. I also had another question from myself, because I see most of them in the chat are answered, I think. So you just talked about like games versus like film, television. I think Kate also already mentioned like Cleopatra's portrayal in games is sort of similar to how we find it in films. In what ways do you think that the insights of the volume of the book are applicable, like beyond gaming itself? Like what do games do differently? What do they do similar? Of course, games are they're ergodic, they're interactive, they're participatory, so there's a difference there. But do you see any like substantial differences or similarities with how games work vis-a-vis the other popular media?
So I think a lot of the kind of representational tropes are the same, by which I mean not kind of when you think about, so there's multiple ways of analyzing games, as we know, and we talked about this a little bit earlier on, the kind of thinking about them methodologically. You can look at games almost like just another kind of media, so we can look at portrayals of character and kind of storylines and so on, and in that regard treat them almost like films. And in those areas, quite a lot of the things we see for women in games are very similar to the kinds of things we see for women in ancient world TV and films as well. I would say there's maybe slightly less sex than there is in ancient world TV. There's a real focus. I know there is quite a lot of sexualized women in games, but the kind of really extreme levels of sexuality that you see in kind of ancient world TV over the last 10 to 20 years hasn't quite made it into games yet in quite the same way, or at least not kind of mainstream games maybe. But I think, you know, what's really interesting about games, and what kind of certainly some of our chapters look at, and what I think could be a really good space to go next with some of this research, are the places where they're different. So where we're not just looking at representations of characters, but we're looking at the kind of play experience. And certainly this is where I would like to kind of develop this research on gender further. So what difference does it make playing as a woman? And that's obviously we've talked already about the Assassin's Creed chapter that looks at kind of playing as Cassandra versus playing as Alexios. And that is something which you don't get the opportunity to do in kind of other modern media, you know, films and TV. You can have obviously a protagonist, but it is not the same experience. And this should be a place where games can, I think, present really different views about gender. At the moment, I'm not sure it is, but there's a lot of potential there for the kind of the mechanics of gaming to make a big difference, to move away from some of the representations that we just see in other media. As I say, I'm not sure we've got there yet, but there's a lot of potential there. And that's a major difference.
Yeah, I think that the element of mechanics, I think the the element of play experience, I think, is very important in that regard, and something that, as far as I'm aware, has not been that extensively studied either. Like the actual act of how people play these games. I think that's, I mean, something that could still be explored further. I remember, I think is it Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, where you play as a female protagonist, like Aveline, I think she's called.
Evelyn, yes.
Aveline, yeah.
Yes.
And I think depending on the clothes you wear in the game, I think other characters like NPCs, they react differently to you, don't they?
Yeah, you
yeah.
you have 3 different personas, which is also sort of gets into the issue of race, because she's not white and she's not black. She's like a, some degree of mix. And so if you wear the clothes of a slave, you're like more sneaky, but you can't enter certain place. If you wear like your high society clothes, you are well received in certain places, and you can distract guards in other ways, but you cannot parkour, for instance, which was a very interesting thing. Once again, I would not necessarily trust Ubisoft with issues of race and gender, which is also why I'm especially wary of Mirage. First of all, because the title itself, whatever. Second of all, because anything set in Western Asia from Ubisoft at this point in time, I have big concerns about religion and color and ethnicity, and it's not because we cannot have games that are set in weird places or like give weird twists to things. I mean, Prince of Persia, that Persia never existed, but because if you want to make a big deal of historical accuracy, which is something that came out time and time again in your book, then you have to make certain choices in terms of historical accuracy, but whose historical accuracy that is, right? So that is a problem. But in terms of characters and choices, we actually had a question about how would a dynamic in which you can personalize your avatar work in video games? Because that's the next thing, right? In certain games, you can change clothes and you can change your cosmetics, but what if you can like actually change the physicality of your character?
Same goes for VR, I think.
You could do that years ago in the Fable games.
Yes,
you could.
Yes.
The food that Fable. You ate, the way that you acted would change your character's appearance, and it would change the way that everybody else in the game reacted to you, and it would give you different choices and things like that. So, if that was possible, 20 years ago, I don't know why it's not possible now. Why we have these very restricted sort of trees of choices and things like that. I think it's if a game development company wanted to do that, I don't see why with the 21st century technology we have available to us, including virtual reality in some cases, I don't know why they can't do that, and I assume it's because they choose not to, because they don't want to get into that. Perhaps that's taking this issue of historical accuracy or historical authenticity in a different direction. It's like how do we decide what choices are available to people if they can do anything within this game? How do we decide what we want them to do in relation to the history and the culture and the game that they're playing?
Yeah, so one game that I think is a really interesting example in relation to this is actually, I feel like I keep selling my own work at the moment, but I'm writing a chapter for a forthcoming volume on it. So keep an eye out, Stream, because it is coming.
We're good with that.
Yeah. Well, it's on Expeditions Rome, which I know some people here have played, because what's really interesting about that is that they allow you to choose, are you going to play as a man or a woman? And then they make a difference through a dynamic which I'm basically calling historical sexism, because if you play as a female character, quite a lot of the time other characters around you will say really annoying things, like sometimes they're downright insulting, and sometimes your early companions say things like, oh well, of course as a woman you won't be participating in this war, and as a player you think, well hang on a minute, I just paid 50 odd quid to participate in this war, excuse me, I think I'm going to want to. But what's really interesting is the way that they've taken the kind of balance between gameplay experience and kind of flavor almost. So actually, of course, you can participate in the war. It would be the worst game ever if you could choose to play as a woman, but then you can't play, or you could choose to play as a man. But people comment, and there are differences in the kind of storylines you have, and there are kind of slight subtle changes and slightly different scenes unlocked depending on whether you play as a man or a woman. But overall, the gameplay experience is not restricted by playing as a woman. And I think that's a really interesting balance between a sort of attempt at creating certainly a feel of authenticity that is kind of centered around gender, that isn't, is but probably not all that authentic, because I think even with the most supportive men in the world around you probably could not become a commander of legions as a Roman woman, regardless of what this game says. But there's enough lip service paid to these ideas that it creates a very different impression of the kind of the communities you're moving through, and the way people respond to you and so on are kind of persistently made slightly different. And I think that's really interesting. It's not the first time they've done it either. They did the same in their Viking game, which I haven't played, but I'm kind of aware of, and I know there is a chapter of in Jane's other volume, the historical games. So I think it shows that there are potentials for different models here, for different ways of thinking about some of these questions and representing them differently, that then do intersect with these questions of gameplay in really different ways. So then the question is, how much are you affecting gameplay, how much are you affecting kind of the things around it? And I think that's kind of really interesting. And as we see, hopefully we see more of these games kind of doing more different things, because what I would really like to see in kind of historical games is just a range of different models. Some that have maybe the Assassin's Creed choose your gender, but it makes literally no difference. Some where it does make a difference, but all of the options, so we can see different things in different places and have as much choice as possible, would be ideal. But I think as game developers and game studios start thinking about some of these questions, we will start to see more interesting attempts to interact with some of these issues.
Yeah. Now that you're talking about gender related things, what a great thing would have been in Odyssey if when playing as Cassandra, you could not participate in the Olympics and had to find another way to infiltrate, right? Which is also like historically accurate, because we know of women who dressed up, with fake beards and the whole thing to get in. That would have been like not like a solution to having the choose your gender thing, but it would have made the gameplay so much better. Like, you can't participate in a symposium. You're a woman. What do? You dress up as a hetera and pretend to be a sex worker, or do you pretend to be a slave? There would have been so many options. And I feel like that was a missed opportunity also to explore gender dynamics in a historical setting, because having the same things for a female and male character is kind of, it devalues one side of the experience, and then it makes it like the other one is the standard, and then one you're like, this is slightly off, but it's not really off in a historical way that is like meaningful. It's just off because it's the same but with a different appearance of the character. And the same thing, and then I'm gonna stop talking about Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I promise. If they had just set a female character, then the power struggle would have made so much more sense, because then you're a woman in a position of power that is really not supposed to be yours, also for blood reasons. But it would have been much more compelling, I think, for like, oh, look, these people don't want me because I am a woman and not of the blood of the ruling thing. So as someone in the chat is saying, basically an RPG that is actually historically respectful, accurate, and inclusive. Imagine. But it's true. And also, I do think that many gamers would be afraid that like playing as a female character, if it was like historically accurate, it would be reductive, limiting, because you can't do many of the things. But then again, it's a make-believe game. You can do things, you can go around, right? There's an obstacle, go around in a creative way that feels historically accurate, even if it really did not happen that way. But we could talk for hours about historical accuracy and like the ways in which people are gatekeeping the experience with the guise of historical accuracy. Ooh, I'm gonna take a breath now.
I think sometimes the most interesting games are the ones that completely eschew accuracy. I think the ones that are just, I remember this game, I think it's called Penelope, and then something else. I think it's like a racing game that you're playing, and you're playing as, I mean, Penelope, and she's not in Ithaca waiting for Odysseus to arrive. She searches for him through like these various like racing themed levels, and I think that's very interesting. And I think if we additionally to the more like the like as Kate said, like the more Assassin's Creed models, if we can get these different models as well to explore these different possibilities through having players do things, because that's what I think the most interesting and important thing about the medium is, like, it's people are empowered to do things rather than just be be passive audience members. I think then we can get into very interesting avenues as well.
We should learn from D&D and trying to find ways to deceive and persuade and intimidate your way through situations. If you roll well, if you roll high, if you roll low, then sorry, you paid $50, but you can't go in campaign. Sorry, other Kate. That's that's how the game works. It's a game mechanic.
So we've been going for over an hour, so, and I don't want to keep our guests for too long, of course, but maybe like as a final question, if there are no other questions in the chat, like where do you see, like, to sort of tie everything together, where do you see it going from here, like both in terms of gaming itself, but also in like the study of games? Because I mean, I saw a couple of entries in the book mentioning that, I mean, we're seeing more effort on the developers' parts to be more inclusive, to be more diverse. But at the same time, we have been talking about Assassin's Creed Mirage as well. So like, where do you see, how do you envision the future based on these developments?
I think it depends on the gamers, to be honest, because if developers make games that are more inclusive and there is very significant backlash from a significant minority, possibly, or even a majority of the gamers who do not want change, then that obviously, review bombing affects the sales of a game. That has an effect on the bottom line of the company. Games companies go bust when they make a game that doesn't sell, and that is unfortunately, the commercial consideration is the smaller independent studios can be a bit more creative because they're starting from a much lower position, but the big studios, they do not have that luxury. So I think it will depend if gamers show themselves to be open to new directions, then hopefully I'm talking about AAA games, I suppose, really, but because of course, as Kate has said, in the mobile world, there are very different things happening, probably because the people that play mobile games are a very different demographic to the people that play AAA games or the people that play independent games. So potentially we can try and highlight in scholarship, we can highlight these different types of games and the different types of things you can do in them, so that people can find them and then more people play them, and it proves itself to be profitable to developers to take these other risks.
So you're basically saying that it's a plea for gamers to write the Reddit post, to go on Twitter and demand, I mean, what they want, like demand good representations and inclusive diversity.
Well, to have a bit of empathy as well, and to sort of step outside their comfort zone, because if you why would you go into a fantasy world and be yourself, exactly the same as yourself, and play it exactly the same way that you live your existing life? Why wouldn't you try and explore these different ways of living, ways of being? And if you have to play as a woman in a historical game and you get told, no, you can't do this, you can't enter this room, you can't enter this sphere, maybe then you start thinking, well, hang on, does that happen in real life? And every woman that you know will say, yes, it does. And we keep telling you and nothing changes. So hopefully the real world can impact games, and games can impact the real world, and for the benefit of everybody, really.
I have a lot of snarky comments, but I wrote them in the chat. As someone in the Twitch chat is mentioning, there's also the issue of equity within AAA studios, and Ubisoft as a prime example. And the leadership is the exact profile of the gamer that would reject this kind of progress, which, I mean, unfortunately, it seems accurate.
I was going to say earlier, but my screen froze when you were talking about Assassin's Creed Mirage. I will not be playing any more Ubisoft games of any kind until they get their house in order, frankly. I just, the whole thing, just, I find it thoroughly unpleasant, and I'm not going to reward them with my money or my time.
Not even
all
if
my
they give us,
come to that.
Not even if they give us the coveted Prince of Persia remake, which I was hoping, because that was my childhood. And also, you know, I mean, Princess Farah was a great role model. Yeah, no, it's and someone in the chat is saying that they're boycotting Blizzard for the same reason. And that's true. That's a whole other giant issue. But I think we can see it reflected in the choices, especially the marketing choices that they are making. And you know, the general development choices that they're making in these games, like scrapping female protagonists because they don't sell. And yes, we are still salty about that Aya game that never was.
I think it's worth saying there is room for kind of positivity. I think we shouldn't, both Jane and I, as we said in our introduction, were disappointed not to find kind of more positive case studies, but that doesn't mean there are none. Like the you know, the increasing success of independent studios can be really positive in this regard. I think the fact that Hades did so extremely well, you know, from an independent studio with a really inclusive attitude to mythology and kind of all sorts of really exciting questions being raised around particularly sexuality and race in that game, is a big sign of positivity. And the fact that there are more games, okay, so Ubisoft is taking a massive step backwards, but other studios are introducing more female protagonists, you know, including some AAA studios. There are more female game developers and writers working in the industry, and hopefully that will start to change things. There are growing numbers of female players as well. In fact, on many consoles, they are now a slight majority. So
and they're more and more visible and vocal, which is probably what was missing when I was starting several decades ago.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, you know, my hope would certainly be that I don't think it's going to be as quick as I would like, but certainly as kind of time goes on, and also as we keep raising these issues. So what all of us, you know, scholars, players, people who are just watching the Twitch now, all need to be just talking about these issues. And the more talking about these issues that's going on, the more room there is for progress, and the more of these different kinds of models we'll see that start engaging with these questions. And I think there is, you know, there's room for positivity there, and that will lead to not just more inclusive games, but probably more exciting games, as Jane says, where you get to try different things and kind of explore different experiences and all that kind of thing. So there are, you know, things can get better in that regard. And in terms of scholarship, there is so much to do, because we've only just started this field. That kind of more scholarship on anything related to games, and obviously particularly I think gender and games, but frankly anything on games and history, particularly the ancient world, should be being done. Because until we've got quite a big field here, it's harder to know where the gaps are. So anything you fancy doing, if you're in the Twitch chat right now, do it, write it all, and then we can go from there in terms of where the gaps are appearing.
Yeah, I mean, these sorts of issues are making their way into TV representations of games companies. So Mythic Quest, Halt and Catch Fire, you know, they are covering these sorts of issues in their storylines. So yeah, there is clearly awareness. So yeah, let's see what happens.
You know, sky's the limit, and the more noise is made about these things, and the more also like traditional quote unquote academia talks about these things, then the more people speak up about it. But yeah, no, I agree. There is reason to be optimistic, also because sky's the limit when you're creating things. I mean, I know the funding is the limit, but let's be optimistic here and say sky's the limit. With an asterisk, with like funding, you know, pending funding. Let's put it this way.
If Hideo Kojima can make Death Stranding, I mean,
right?
Anything can happen.
Yeah,
Anything is possible in the creative sphere.
Yeah.
That's right. I also read an article yesterday said that comfort games are going to be the next big thing. So I'm hoping for comfort games like Stray coffee shop and like unpacking, but like set in ancient Greece or like in the ancient world. I would love that. But instead of unpacking, it's like pottery making. You're making your own vases. I'm a big nerd, but you know, that's another option. That's another way to go about things.
I would totally buy an ancient Greek Stray game. Like just you're a cat walking on the Agora. I mean, that would be fantastic.
But imagine
Yeah.
a cat in ancient Egypt. Imagine the
Yeah, ooh,
possibilities. Okay, no, I would love that. We need to talk about developers here.
Yeah. All right. So if there's no more
Oh.
questions in the chat, then I would like to thank Kate and Jane incredibly much for doing this. I think this was a great event. And if anyone here has not read the book or gotten the book yet, I hope you've gotten
Do it.
excited to do so. Anything else that Kate and Jane want to say or plug, or if you have any links to share?
Well, I've just shared the link for the book, which maybe someone can put in
Beautifully,
the
Oh, yeah.
chat.
beautifully copied and pasted in the Twitch chat.
Yeah.
Excellent. No, then from me, just thanks very much for having us. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Thank you.
the same from me. And this is not the only place that we have in the past talked about games and classics and ancient history. So if you want to hear us talk about those things, you can find that stuff, podcasts and whatnot online. And you can find us too. And we post our work, and we tend to post our own gaming progress as well, don't we?
Yes, we're both on
and-
Twitter, so you can find us both on Twitter and follow our
us-
activities and events.
Send
and
us
so
send
on.
us the links and we'll copy them.
Yep.
Because that's I think like I've been following both of you for like months before I realized that you were actually the the editors of that volume. Too many people. It's Twitter fatigue.
We'll write the Twitter handles in the chat.
Perfect. Excellent.
Oh yeah.
Put
You
them,
beat me
put
to
them
it.
there. Yes. All right. Well, thanks a lot for coming here in different time zones. You know, children involved, bad connectivity. It's fine. We got all of it. Thank you so much for the conversation. It was incredible. It was fantastic. Thank you, Alex, for dealing with all of this, especially with me blabbering too much. Thank you, chat, for being so active and sending so many questions. And thank you everyone who subscribed. We got at least 4 subscriptions during this thing, so thank you everyone. We're really happy. We're starting this season with a bang.
Maybe we should say what we're doing in the next couple of weeks.
Please.
Yeah. So for the next 2 weeks, I think it is, we'll be playing. We'll be right on our usual schedule on Fridays at 2 p.m. EST or 8 p.m. in Europe, and we'll be playing Skubma Snowfall, which is an amazing Sami game, which explores like all kinds of Sami myths and Sami legends. And for the first stream of Skubma, we'll be joined by none other than the actual developer of Skubma. We'll be joined by Mariana Auranen, and that will only be like the first of a great lineup of streams that we have planned for the fall. So make sure to watch this space and Twitter and Facebook and basically everywhere
and
else.
Instagram and everything where we are.
Yeah.
We may or may not be playing some Smite at the end of the month. So some of us that have never played Smite are trying to choose the gods to use. And then we will play more Immortals Phoenix Rising. And then, I mean, it's not necessary to say, but we have to say it. Once God of War Ragnarok comes out, we will be playing that because, you know, we have to. We have a lot of specials planned. So stay tuned. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being so active in the chat. Thank you, Kate and Jane, for giving us your time and you know, and answering the questions and unpacking all sort of weird things that we throw at you. And I don't have the power to end the stream. So I'm calling the higher powers to end it if you are listening. So Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
Bye,
Now we are
everyone.
going to, yeah, we're going to be here and be awkward until the stream ends. Hopefully, right?
Hopefully.
What happens if we end the call? I'm wondering.
I mean, I think that also works. But does it just like stream an empty screen?
Possibly.
Lauren, are you there?
Lauren, can you hear us? This is now becoming a seance. Lauren, can you hear us? Sage, can you perceive us? I know someone should be there. Oh, well.
Well, this is the first time we're using Zoom, so
Yeah, sorry about that. I think I need to make myself host to end it if Lauren's not like responding. So give me a second to figure that out. Yeah, it's been a while since I've like done this, so I don't know why it won't just let me turn it off. That's not it.
It's true. We
Yeah.
still have so many viewers.
thank you
What-
for
what the-
reminding us, looking at us.